Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Identity Celebrating Stories. I'm Susan Maguire, Senior Editor, Collection Management and Library Outreach. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Links to today's slide presentation and title list were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Elham Ali, Senior Publicist at ECW Press, Jyotsna Srinivasan, author of These Americans from Minerva Rising Press, Katie Hearn, Editorial Director at Annick Press, Bronte Germain, Sales Coordinator at Second Story Press, and Joe Stacy, Digital Marketer and Sales Coordinator at Lorimer Children Teens. First, we'll hear from Elham Ali. Elham is a writer and publishing professional based in Toronto. She graduated from the University of Toronto in 2014, and since completing the Humber College Publishing Program, she has worked in marketing and publicity at Canada's Ballet Oregon, Penguin Random House Canada, and Dundurn Press. She currently works as a senior publicist at ECW Press. Take it away, Elham.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be part of this presentation with you. So for those of you who don't know ECW Press, next slide, please. ECW is one of the most diversified independent publishers in North America. We've been around for almost 50 years, and in that time have published almost 1,000 titles that run an absolutely incredible spectrum of subjects and genres, from poetry to fiction to award-winning and insightful nonfiction, and more books on wrestling and music than you would ever have thought possible. Next slide, please. So the theme of today's presentation, besides identity, is really something for everyone. It's the thing that makes ECW so unique. But despite already having this really incredible backlist, we have made some changes in our editorial department recently, and so we're hoping to only increase the diversity in our list and once again, just reach even more audiences. New additions to our editorial department, Pia Singal and Jen Sukfongli, have already acquired some really incredible books that you can look forward to seeing in future seasons. And our production editor, Jen Albert, is specifically acquiring more science fiction, fantasy, and speculative fiction, an area that we've noticed a lot of gaps in, particularly in Canada. And again, we're hoping to become a home for those incredible voices. Next slide, please. Again, continuing this theme of something for everyone, I just wanted to talk briefly about ECW's work in accessibility. Providing accessible content is a huge priority for us at ECW. And in 2021, we were actually awarded Benetech's Global Certified Accessible certification. That means that all of our ebooks are certified accessible and screen reader friendly, built to meet the needs of anyone who is unable to read standard print due to blindness, low vision, dyslexia, and disabilities. We're also one of Canada's leading audiobook producers. In 2020, we created over 100 accessible audiobooks and are on track to have 94% of our titles available in accessible audio in 2021. And all of the books that we're going to be talking about today are going to be available in print, but also in accessible ebook and audio for all of our readers out there and all of your readers at your libraries. Next slide, please. So now let's jump right into the books. Again, there's a huge spectrum of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Also, we're including backlist, current frontlist titles, and some future titles that you can look forward to. The first book that we have is Moments of Glad Grace. This is a memoir by Alison Waring. And this is one that it really tackles the theme of identity in a fairly literal sense. Alison is a best-selling author, teacher, performer, and writing instructor. And in this memoir, we're following Alison and her father, Joe, who was actually the subject of her previous book, Confessions of a Fairy's Daughter, Growing Up with a Gay Dad, as they travel from Canada to their ancestral home in Ireland on a genealogical research trip. But pretty soon after they get there, the nature of the mission changes. And so rather than being a rigorous study in genealogy, they move into the realm of like larger discussions on family, forgiveness, that sort of primal search for identity and belonging, and questions about our responsibility to our ancestors and the extent to which those who came before us shaped the people who we are today. Next slide, please. Next, we have a novel, The Subtweet. And if you have not heard of Vivek Shreya, where have you been? Vivek is an artist whose work crosses the boundaries of music, literature, visual art, theater, and film. She is a Polaris Music Prize nominee, a 5-time Lambda Literary Award finalist. She is an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Calgary and is the founder of her own publishing imprint, VS Books, which are published under Arsenal Pulp Press. The Subtweet is Vivek's second novel. It takes on topics of female friendship, art, brown culture, social media, call-out culture, the music industry, and sexism. And it's all wrapped in this incredibly fast-paced and stunningly written novel. In Vivek's own words, this is a book about two women who have nothing but love and admiration for each other, for their work. Both of the main characters are female musicians, but ultimately they feel like there just isn't enough room in the world of music for two brown women to be successful. And so at the intersection of racism and patriarchy is really where the crux of the conflict lies. It's perfect for fans of Zadie Smith's Swing Time and readers who really love that urban, commercial, sort of literary fiction blend that writers like Sally Rooney are really taking into the mainstream. Next slide, please. Now we have a collection of poetry. This is This Scary by Jacob Shire. It's the newest collection of poetry by Jacob, who is an award-winning poet. The collection focuses on suffering in many different forms. This includes depression and anxiety, chronic physical ailment, and rare neurological malady. But as well as being a person with disabilities, the poet Jacob is also, he identifies as a diaspora Jew. And so he is engaging in exile as a chronic state of being, as well as physical and mental illness. In both of these cases, what makes the poetry in this so incredible is that Jacob is rejecting pathologizing or any sort of triumphant narratives. Nothing in this collection is overcome. There is no sort of triumphant story arc. Instead, he treats pain and all of these different identities and states of being as deserving to be honored and expressed and explored rather than overcome. Next slide, please. Now we're moving into our current season with The Annual Migration of Clouds by Premie Mohammed. This is a new addition to the sort of growing subgenre of post-climate apocalypse fiction. And Premie is an absolute she's a rising star in the sci-fi genre. Set in post-climate collapse Alberta, we're following Reed and her community who live in this desolate and depleted world where one of the many after effects of climate change is CAD, a mind-altering fungus that infects the bodies of hosts and makes it so that you can't really tell where your own thoughts begin and the influence of the fungus ends. And the annual migration of clouds is really unique because rather than being the kind of dystopia that takes on massive national or global crises, you're following one small community and one character's personal experience of this new world. So if you loved Wa Bryce's Moon of the Crusted Snow, this is perfect for you. It's very character driven. It's stunningly written. Publishers Weekly called it a masterclass in world building. So really, I cannot recommend this one enough. Premie is an Indo-Canadian biologist and a novelist who, again, her career has absolutely exploded in the last year. And the other sort of great thing about this book is Premie's work in biology, specifically like soil science, really informs the apocalypse that she has created and kind of adds this other frightening layer of realism over everything. Next slide, please. Now we have another memoir, The Light Stream Beneath It. This is an absolutely stunning memoir by comedian Sean Hitchens. He's taking readers into a year of unthinkable loss, as within the span of only a few months, he loses the two great loves of his life. His ex-husband, close friend, and soulmate Matt died unexpectedly in an accident. And then a few months later, a very sort of tumultuous but intensely passionate relationship ends abruptly when his partner David takes his own life. It's a challenging book, so definitely trigger warnings for readers, but at the same time, it's also extremely hopeful. It's a book about how Sean survived that year. It explores grief, queer love, community, and the beautiful absurdity of being alive. It's perfect for readers of Suleika Jaouad's Between Two Kingdoms. And I'd also recommend it to readers who loved Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House. I know they're very different in subject matter, but they're similar in that they are exploring a different aspect of queer relationships. In this case, it's the sort of unconventional relationship that Sean had with his ex-husband as well as his current lover. Next slide, please. The next book is What's the Matter with Mary Jane? That's an epitome, not epitome, apartment mystery by Candace Jane Dorsey, the follow-up to the 2020 hit The Adventures of Isabel. When both books feature a nameless, faceless, postmodern, pansexual, grammatically pedantic sleuth. It's fierce, it's funny, it's sex positive, and for people who love Veronica Mars or Sue Grafton's Kinsey Malone, as well as people who are looking for a sort of feminist mystery with a distinctly queer perspective. A lot of the praise around both of these books have been around their originality. Next slide, please. I'm gonna have to quickly run through the next two books. These are both coming up for our 2022 season, so you can look forward to those. The first is Help, I'm Alive by Gurjinder Basran. Gurjinder is a celebrated Canadian author whose previous books have both tackled issues of grief, and this is very much the same. In this book, young teens suicide a video of that is shared on social media, and that leaves their community sort of reeling, trying to figure out what happened, but also to confront who they were before this act, their relationship with the young teen Jay, and the people that they are supposed to be after the event. If you loved Celeste Ng's Everything I Ever Told You, then this is very much the same. It's about sort of the aftermath of suicide and the effect it has on the lives of people that are left behind. And finally, next slide, please. Kamal Gupta's Play It Right is a memoir for people who loved The Biggest Bluff, A Man for All Markets, and if you're still hung up on that 2008 movie 21, this is perfect for you. Kamal's memoir chronicles his journey from New Delhi to Las Vegas to New York, from Indian immigrant to ultimate insider, and from professional gambler to money manager at some of the world's largest hedge funds. It offers a rare insider's look into the world of high finance. This is a world where fear and greed rule, but Kamal throughout his time there managed to really sort of keep his humanity forefront and remember that enough money is enough. It reads like a work of fiction. It's very sort of darkly funny at times, but is very much based on actual events. Next slide. So yep, thank you so much for having me. Please do visit ECW's website. We'll send you some links after the webinar. You can also check out our full catalog on Edelweiss and Catalyst. Please sign up for our library newsletter. And if you have questions, feel free to email myself or anyone on our team. I should also just quickly mention that all of the sort of front list books that I mentioned are available in ARCs, and we'll soon have ARCs for the 2022 titles as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellen. We'll now hear from Jyotsna Srinivasan. Jyotsna Jo Srinivasan is the author of the short story collection These Americans and the novel And Laughter Fell from the Sky. Both are about Indian Americans in the Midwest. Her short stories have been published in literary magazines, including Copper Nickel, Tampa Review, and Tiferet. Some of her stories, have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She was selected as a fiction fellow at the 2021 Sewanee Writers Conference and was a finalist for the 2014 Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. For more information about Jyotsna, as well as other writers who are children of immigrants, please see secondgenstories.com. And welcome, Jyotsna. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here connecting with librarians. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my book, These Americans. It's the winner of the Rosemary Daniel Fiction Prize from the publisher, Minerva Rising Press. Next, please. And I want to tell you a little bit about Minerva Rising Press. It was founded by Kim Brown. It's in Florida, and it's an independent literary press, and she wants to focus on women. So to give women space to tell their stories, celebrate their creativity, and so forth. Next. So a little bit more about my book. It is 8 short stories and a novella about Indian Americans. It's for adults and older teens. It's not specifically a YA book at all, but I think it would be fine for older teens and college students and definitely adults. And an earlier version of the novella was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize. Next, please. Okay, so the stories all have different characters, but they form a cohesive whole because they're all about Indian Americans. Another way that they are kind of cohesive is that the stories are arranged in order of the age of the second generation character. So in other words, the child of immigrants. So in the first story, a new immigrant mom is giving birth to her American daughter. And then in the second story, the child of immigrants is 7 years old. And by the end, by the novella, the immigrant character is elderly and her daughter is middle-aged. So that's another way they're kind of arranged in that kind of chronological order. They're somewhat autobiographical. Some of them are really autobiographical. And this picture is a picture of my mom holding me when I was a baby. And the cover artist used this picture to draw her cover. Next, please. So here's some nice things people have said about it. Accessible, thought-provoking, offers a rich set of insights. Margot Livesey said some really nice things. She said it's dazzling and lovely, which made me feel really wonderful. Forward review said it's captivating, etc. Next, please. And on my website, secondgenstories.com, I have some resources for readers. I have some discussion questions. So if you know you're holding a book club or a reading group or something like that, you can, maybe the discussion questions would be helpful. And I also have reviews and lists of other books by second generation authors. So if you're interested in that that category, definitely check out my website. I've got lots of other suggestions. Next, please. And I have a resource for teachers as well. It's a free lesson plan, and it's actually mostly not about my books. It's about immigration, the American dream, and the second generation. It's for middle school and high school language arts classes, and it's a free download from my website. So that's it for the slideshow. And I was going to read a little bit from a couple of the stories to kind of give you a sense of what they're like. And you can also read excerpts. I have like this first page of each story on my website. You can read that as well. So this first story, again, is a new immigrant mom giving birth in a hospital, and it's in a small town in Ohio, and it's called Mirror. And she obviously would have a nice Indian accent if she, when she's speaking English, and I have a Midwestern accent, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm lying on this hard hospital delivery bed with only a small thin robe over my body. My legs, even my knees, are all uncovered, and my bare feet are in these stirrups. It's indecent how you must be to give birth. In India, do they cover the women more? I don't know, but here in America, no one cares. They go about in shorts and swimming suits anyway. My hands and arms are cold. My stomach is a big mountain. Every so often it gets hard, and I know I'm having a contraction. It doesn't hurt at all. They gave me a shot in my back. It is called an epidural. I'm glad. I was afraid I would scream and embarrass myself. The American nurse comes in. She's thin and tall. She smiles. I have gotten used to these Americans smiling all the time. When I first came here in April of 1965, almost 2 years ago, I thought, why are they always laughing at me? At first I thought, it's my sari and my kumkum. They have never seen someone wearing a sari and kumkum before. Then after I took off the kumkum and began wearing skirts and shaving my legs and everything, still they laughed. I thought, what's wrong with me that they should be showing their teeth every time I appear? Finally, I asked my friend Betty Pryor. She's my closest friend in America. She's a single lady and she owns a house, and we stay in the apartment in the basement. Imagine a single lady owning her own house and even renting it to strangers. Betty told me, Prema, they are not laughing at you. They are just being friendly. You must also smile when you meet someone. Then she said, you have a beautiful smile. No one ever told me I was beautiful before. The next morning, after I brushed my teeth, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. A frowning brown lady was there staring at me. I opened my lips and stretched them into a smile. The lady in the mirror looked funny, and I began laughing, and there was a pretty lady laughing back at me. Then I felt ashamed of myself and left the bathroom. Who did I think I was? A princess or something? And so that's just a couple of pages from the first story. And I thought I would read a little bit from one of the middle stories. This one is called Revolution. And the main character, he's a 13-year-old boy. He's half Indian. So his dad is from India, and his mom, her family has been in the United States for generations. So it's called Revolution. Neil was 13 and his sister, Anita, was 10 when their parents split up. On a chilly day in March, his mother picked him up after his astronomy club and a club meeting and told him. As he sat in the front seat listening to her, Neil tried to keep his mind on the fact that he, his mother, the car, and the freeway were at that moment spinning through space at 30 kilometers per second on their journey around the sun. In the months before the divorce was final, when Dad had moved out and was living on the other side of Newark in an unfurnished efficiency apartment, which contained almost nothing but a beanbag chair and empty Chinese food takeout boxes, Neil asked his parents many times why they were getting divorced. His father, T. Gopalakrishnan, would rub his small pot belly slowly and say in his thick Indian accent, rolling his R's and enunciating each consonant strongly, your mother has decided she does not want to be married to me anymore. His mother, Linda, would toss her long brown hair over her shoulder and say, your father isn't interested in working on our marriage. Neil tried to point out to each parent that apparently things could work out if they simply admitted to each other that they wanted to stay married. They'd shake their heads and look at him searchingly. No, Neil, they'd say, it won't work. I'm sorry. He was baffled by the ways of adults. One day, while he and Anita were sitting on the floor of the basement rec room playing Monopoly, he asked, How can two people get a divorce without ever having a fight? Anita moved her piece, the horse, past Go and counted $200 onto her pile of money. They fought all the time. When? They fought every day. Didn't you hear them? Neil thought about this. He remembered a chilliness in the air during dinners sometimes. He remembered his parents closing their bedroom door and having muffled conversations. He remembered wanting to retreat to his room more often than usual. What did they fight about? He asked. Mom said Dad was spoiled and expected to be treated like a prince. She said she wasn't a subservient Indian wife. Dad said he only wanted a hot meal and a clean house when he came home, and that Mom was the spoiled one. He said she wanted to be waited on hand and foot. Mom said all she wanted was for Dad to pay attention. She said he didn't even know which days the trash was picked up. She said he never remembered her birthday or their anniversary. Mom said they needed marriage counseling, and Dad said he'd never set foot in a counselor's office. He said there was nothing wrong with him. It's your turn, Neil. How did you hear all that? My room is next to theirs. I could hear everything. Neil was astonished that Anita could remember all this. He didn't see how these minor misunderstandings could lead to something as momentous as ripping apart the only life he'd ever known. He thought his parents were hiding something from him. Okay, and that's all. I'll just read those sections. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jyotsna. And next up is Katie Hearn. Katie is the editorial director at Annick Press, and thank you for joining us, Katie.
Thank you, Susan, for having us all today. I'm happy to be here. For those of you who don't know Annick, we are an independent publisher based in Canada, in Toronto. We publish books for kids of all ages, from board books right up to YA. Annick was founded in 1975 on the principle that all kids of all identities should see themselves represented in books. And one of our earliest and still most popular books, The Paperback Princess by Robert Munsch, not only celebrated identity, but it celebrated what it meant to be a princess by challenging conventional notions of identity and conformity and encouraging young readers to consider all the different ways you can define yourself. And in the spirit of that, we've got lots of current titles to highlight for you today. Next slide, please. So here's a quick snapshot of 3 really exciting titles we have coming up this fall, all unique and empowering celebrations of little explored perspectives in books for young readers. Next slide. First up is this heartfelt graphic novel debut, Living with Viola, by comic artist Rosenna Fung. I love this one so much. It doesn't publish till next month, but it's already garnered lots of great praise from fellow graphic novelists, scores of readers, and just recently a starred review from Kirkus saying it elevates the graphic novel genre. Next slide, please. Here's just a taste of the fabulous and energetic art from the interior. And here we have both Livy and Viola, the main characters in the story, represented. So this is a story about Livy. It's one 6th grader's perspective, but it's going to speak to a lot of readers. Livy is 12 and she's navigating life as the new girl at school, but she's also secretly trying to keep Viola at bay. Viola is Livy's alter ego of sorts. She's loud and intrusive, and she's a personification of Livy's very real and very prevalent anxiety. And you can see Viola there at the steps to the school, sort of inhibiting Livy from going anywhere. And this is the story of how Livy learns to cope with her anxiety, her Viola, while at the same time finding the courage to embrace who she really is. It's that anxiety and struggles with self-confidence that what make this story so relatable. And the reason I think not only middle grade readers, but adult buyers of graphic novels are going to gravitate to this one. It fits really well into that subgenre of graphic novels made so popular by Lucy Nisi, Raina Telgemeier, Vera Brogstall, that are not strictly memoirs, but accounts of childhood experiences. This story is one that's very true to the author's own experience. Like Livy, Rosenna Fung suffered with debilitating anxiety and a panic disorder growing up. Livy is the child of parents born in Hong Kong who immigrated, another part of her identity that's informed by Rosenna's own life. And it's this intersection of Asian identity and mental health that we're very excited to have out in the world because it's one that's so rarely explored territory for middle grade readers. Next slide, please. So Livy's story takes place over the course of the school year. And what I love about it is the way that Rosenna takes all the things about Livy, her anxiety, but also her creativity and love of drawing and cooking and plushies, and gives them a life of their own. And you can really see that here in this food spread. Readers will get swept away in Livy's imagination, transported into other worlds by the art she creates and also the cooking she does with her mom. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, not yet. My mistake. By the end of the story, when Viola's presence starts to threaten everything Livy loves and the new friendship she's formed, in spite of Viola, Livy realizes she has to ask for help. And I want to just note about this resolution. We know that anxiety and mental health issues are so prevalent, especially these days. So we wanted to be clear with readers that for Livy, seeking help doesn't mean Viola goes away. It means learning to live with her. And this evolution of learning how to do this at the end of the story is dealt with real sensitivity and creativity and was really carefully thought through during the editing process. The goal here was to help inform readers and show them actual strategies for anxiety as part of the story. There's also really great back matter in this one that we know graphic novel readers will love, including character design, early sketches, which are great added value, an author's note from Rosenna about her own personal history, and also a illustrated glossary of the Cantonese words used throughout the book. Okay, now the next one, please. Sorry about that. So next up is super strong, super original YA that we feel is really poised to make an impact. This is The Words in My Hands by Asphyxia. I've never read anything like this book before. It's incredibly rich and poignant and delves into so many themes that will resonate today: environmental ones, political ones, social justice and identity, all from a perspective that is little explored in YA fiction. So the lead character in this novel is Piper. She's 17 and she's been deaf since the age of 3, like the author herself. Piper gets by with lip reading, but feels it stifles her. She feels ignored. And she's growing up in some time in the not too distant future. And it's one that feels eerily real to us. Coronavirus has just passed. Piper is smart, rebellious, independent, resourceful, and creative, but like a lot of people her age, she doesn't realize she's these things. And The Words in My Hands is very much a novel about the evolving nature of her identity. A huge part of this story is about Piper coming to terms with how to be deaf. Throughout the story, she meets people from the deaf community and learns about signing and finger spelling, which to this point she's been discouraged from doing to get by in the hearing world. But learning this language opens up a whole new world for her and gives her power she didn't know that she had. Next slide, please. The entire book is told through Piper's art journal, and you can see some samples of it here. So we see not only how her story evolves through the narrative, but how her art informs the story. As the story evolves, she uses her art as a bigger form of expression, becoming an activist in her own right. And this format, I think, really lends itself to flipping through and to rereading and will appeal to a wide YA audience. I also learned when I acquired this book that many hearing impaired readers are visual learners. And so this adds to the accessibility of the story for a wide range of readers as well. Next slide, please. This book has, here's just another example of the art within. This book has so much going for it. It's a fresh new voice. It's incredibly engrossing and authentic world building, really strong main character. It's insightful, it's hopeful, and it's empowering. And we'd really love for you to check it out. Next slide, please. And if you have time, please do check out this video as well of the author and talking about her writing process. And just to note, this one publishes in November, but it's already too had a lot of love, including a recent starred review from Kirkus. Next slide, please. So next up is a debut picture book by educator and spoken word artist Cody Dill. Next slide, please. So this story is led by an exuberant older figure narrator who you can see in the artwork here. And it's a celebration of and a tribute to the empowering possibilities of rap. So the narrator goes through his day throughout the story, calling on all the kids in his community to come together to use their creativity and their voices. He encourages the kids to try rap and rhyme and as a way to gain self-confidence and a sense of freedom and performance among their peers, having that confidence to perform and to show others who you really are. Next slide, please. This book is so great. It's all about fun, energy, positivity, creativity, as you can see from the art, super bold and dynamic and energetic. And we hope will really foster a love of hip hop and its empowering potential with readers. Okay, next slide, please. I'm just going to run through a couple of upcoming books for 2022 that we're really excited to have come out. Next slide, please. First up is Abuelita and Me. This is a really touching, beautifully rendered story about a young girl and all the joy she finds in spending time with her grandma. Next slide, please. Here you can see them having so much fun together in the house. But their joy comes to an abrupt halt when they leave the house and they're on an errand one day, and the girl and her abuelita are the targets of racist treatment by a bus driver. Next slide, please. The little girl already regularly witnesses incidents where people dismiss her abuelita or act like they can't understand her. And those, combined with this incident on the bus, makes our young protagonist retreat. She searches within herself when she's back home as she's processed what happened, and she considers how her abuelita responds and how she should respond and how the two of them together can stand up against it. Don't miss this one. The art is so fantastic, and the story is a really powerful way to introduce young readers to the everyday racism that children and their caregivers often encounter. Next slide, please. Another picture book I'd like to quickly highlight is Bharatnatyam in Ballet Shoes by Mahek Jain. So in this story, Paro is excited to learn ballet, but finds herself unable to move like her classmates. Next slide, please. She keeps wanting to incorporate moves from Bharatnatyam, the dance she and her mother practice at home. So the story here is, can she find a way to do both while staying true to herself and maybe learning something new about herself in the process? Next slide, please. It's a really playful and inspiring story about the power of self-expression and creative movement, and it's a true celebration of cultures as well. It's unique in its representation of Bharatnatyam in a picture book and offers a relatable perspective for children who may feel the different cultures they identify with are sometimes irreconcilable. The author's note describes the inspiration behind the story and the real-life meeting and collaboration of Bharatnatyam dancer Rukmini Devi and ballerina Anna Pavlova. Next slide, please. And so this is another middle grade graphic novel debut, Rabbit Chase. And this is the story of Ame, an 11-year-old non-binary Anishinaabe child who feels alienated from the rest of their classmates. On a class trip to make offerings to the water spirits, Ame strays from their class and gets lost, following a rabbit down its path where things take an unusual turn. Next slide, please. So if this sounds familiar at all, it's because author Elizabeth Lapense conceived of Rabbit Chase as an Anishinaabe spin on Alice in Wonderland. So readers familiar with that story will recognize elements of it here, but from a completely different and fresh perspective. It's full of action and energy. Next slide, please, just to show some more of the art and adventure. And it's also a more critical look at the problematic colonial tropes of classic storytelling. It turns those on their head and explores historical, environmental, and social issues in a new light. There's also words in Anishinaabe integral to the story and used throughout, revealing to readers how language really shapes identity and worldview. And the back matter provides translations of those words for readers unfamiliar with them. Rabbit Chase is a debut we're really excited about. It's a fun, layered reading experience for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous readers. And next slide, please. So I think I'm just about out of time, but please do check out the titles I've just mentioned and these great backlist reads of Annick's as well. Lots of fresh perspectives here and celebrations of people's unique and creative identities and really fresh and new spins on storytelling as well. Thanks everyone for listening, and please check out our website where you can sign up for one of our newsletters. And if you're interested in ARCs or have more questions about these titles, please reach out via the Q&A at the end, and I'll be happy to connect with you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Our next panelist today is Bronte Germain. Bronte joined Second Story Press in 2020 after 3 years of working as a sales rep. After spending so much time on the road selling to indie bookstores, libraries, and specialty accounts, she was happy to settle down at Second Story and work on the books that would end up on those shelves. She is overjoyed to be involved in putting more diverse feminist books into the hands of readers. Take it away, Bronte.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm so excited to be part of a panel that is majority Canadian indie presses. We did not plan it that way, but personally, I'm not mad about it. Before I tell you about our books, I just want to do a quick land acknowledgement. I am working and living in Toronto, Ontario. We're situated on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. It was, is, and will always be their land. Second Story has been very privileged to work with Indigenous authors, illustrators, editors, and other collaborators. And we hope that the books that we produce can contribute to the reconciliation process in Canada and in the United States. A little bit about Second Story. We're distributed by Orca Book Publishers in the US, and we have been producing feminist-inspired books for over 30 years. We strive to publish books that celebrate diversity, empowerment, and social justice. So for today's webinar, I'm going to highlight some fall and spring 2021 titles that celebrate all types of identities. And we'll get started with My Art, My World. So if I could get the next slide, awesome. This is one of our A-list titles for fall 2021. It's a hardcover picture book, which is coming out October 19th. It was written by Rita Winkler with some help from her mother and uncle. Rita is a young woman with Down syndrome, and her favorite thing to do is create art. In her debut book, Rita gives us a peek into her daily life and takes us on a very lively journey that throughout the whole book is accompanied by her amazing artwork. The books received some great reviews already, all touching on what a joy it is to enter into Rita's world. And Rita shares her art on Instagram. Her handle is there on this slide. It's at Rita Winkler Art. It's a very delightful account to follow. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Rita has a true passion for artwork, and that's not where her skills end. As we learn in the book, she does yoga, folk dancing classes, she practices sign language, works in a coffee shop, and rides public transit by herself. Her art changes with the seasons, and it reflects her strong family ties and her very unique perspective of the world around her. Because of this, not only does My Art, My World share a fun and very fresh point of view, but it also shows kids that being neurodivergent or having an intellectual disability does not by any means relegate someone to a boring or simple life. Honestly, it's quite the opposite. Rita is very busy. She's busier than me, and we definitely get this impression in the book. Next slide, please. The book is a true standout, not only as a celebration of art and creativity, but as a book that teaches kids about the kind of lives that someone or people with Down syndrome might lead. I personally have not been able to find another book that's written for kids by someone with Down syndrome. Most books that aim to explain Down syndrome to kids fall into sort of a my brother has Down syndrome or what is Down syndrome category. And in comparison, My Art, My World is just bursting with life. It introduces kids to a very real person with a bright and sassy voice, and it challenges many preconceived notions that they may have. Rita is playful, decisive, and very engaging. And throughout the book, she asks lots of questions of the reader. So it's quite interactive and feels like you're having a conversation with her. Next slide. Rita and her mother, Helen, live in Toronto, and her uncle, Mark, lives in New York City. New York inspired this fantastic piece of art that you see here, which is also the cover of our fall 2021 catalog. And one more thing to note about this book is that Rita, Helen, and Mark have decided to donate the profits from the book to organizations that enhance the lives of people with developmental disabilities. Next. All right, next up is Unstoppable, Women with Disabilities, which is a hardcover picture book publishing next Tuesday. It is a bright and informative book about 10 different women who have achieved incredible things. It was written by Helen Wolf, who has been an educator and writer for many, many decades, and who has a lifelong physical disability. And the illustrations are by Karen Patkow, who also has a lifelong disability and walks with a prosthetic leg. Next. With Unstoppable, Helen really wanted to write a book that was celebratory and encouraging, but that didn't gloss over the struggles that these women have faced while trying to break into their respective industries. So she does not by any means shy away from acknowledging the obstacles that were put in the paths of these women, but the takeaway is of the incredible things that they achieved. Next. The women profiled are from around the world. They work in a wide variety of disciplines, from music to environmental science to advocacy. The 4 American women included in the book are a lawyer, an architect, a neurosurgeon, and a stand-up comedian. There's also a wide variety of disabilities that are portrayed, both physical and intellectual, and some were born with them and some became disabled later in life. Next. The best known person who's profiled is probably Greta Turnburg, but most of these women fall into the people you should know about category, which makes it all the more celebratory. These women very much deserve their flowers, and Helen makes sure that they get them. The tone of her writing is frank and avoids condescension while acknowledging the extra barriers that women with disabilities face in an ableist world. Unstoppable prompts introspection and leaves us informed and inspired. Next. All right, from celebrating different abilities, we move to celebrating Indigenous voices in history. Gas, or The Train, is a hardcover picture book which comes out next week in the dual language edition of The Train, which first pubbed last spring. In its original English only edition, it was one of the winners of our Indigenous writing contest, and it was written by Jody Callahan and illustrated by Georgia Leslie. The Train is the story of a child learning from her great uncle about his experience of being taken away to a residential school and having his culture stripped away from him. The Train received great reviews in its English edition, and we are very pleased to have had Joe Wilmot interpret the story into Mi'kmaq for this dual language edition. Author Jody Callahan and translator/interpreter Joe Wilmot are both actually from the same First Nation, the Listigage First Nation, which is just on the border of Quebec and Nova Scotia. Next. In Gas, we see through a child's eyes the lasting trauma of residential schools, a topic which, as I'm sure you're aware, has really come to the forefront this year as hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered on the grounds of multiple different residential schools in Canada. The topic can, for obvious reasons, be hard to discuss with children, but in both Canada and the US, it's a vital part of the nation's history. And the gentle illustrations and pretty straightforward text in this book make it a really good way to introduce children to this chapter in North American history. Next. One of the primary themes in the book is the way that Uncle's culture and language were stolen from him and how he's missing something that he can't get back. And this is based on the author's own experience with her older relatives, hearing stories about their forced assimilation in residential and day schools. Jody herself is only just learning the Mi'kmaq language as a result of the theft of language and culture that her family and community suffered. And because of that, it was especially important to her that the book be published in this dual language edition. Next. So really, the dual language edition not only celebrates this the Mi'kmaq people and helps preserve their language, but it also mourns what so many of them have lost. It's a very gentle and heartwarming story, as much as it is a challenging topic. And it also depicts a very loving intergenerational relationship between an elder and a young child and shows the value of stories. Next. Okay, I have two more titles. This is a paperback middle grade novel publishing on September 28th. CL in All Directions is the sequel to CL, both written by Sophie Labelle. Sophie is a trans writer and cartoonist, best known for her series Assigned Male. She has a large, very loyal, and very engaged social media following, and this series has received praise for being a very cheerful and well-rounded portrait of a young, non-binary trans kid. In CL in All Directions, CL and their friends are working with their school's LGBTQ+ alliance. They are creating YouTube videos, they're working on a science project, and both books are really full of friendship, romance, and basically just good, clean fun, and really a celebration of what we want for trans kids, non-binary kids, kids all across the gender spectrum, which is a life full of joy and free from unnecessary trauma. And really, it's a great way to make sure that non-binary and trans kids have representation on your shelves in all kinds of narratives. Next. Last on the docket today is one of our favorite series of middle grade paperback novels, The Mighty Muskrat's Mysteries by Cree author Michael Hutchinson. The first book, The Case of Windy Lake, was one of the winners of our 2018 Indigenous Writing Contest, and the series has only grown since then. It's known as a sort of Indigenous Hardy Boys series. The mysteries are really fun and intriguing, and the four cousins who solve the mysteries continuously demonstrate the strength of their family and community, making for a really feel-good read with lots of momentum. However, the books don't shy away from serious issues such as environmentalism, protests and activism, the legacy of residential schools, and the 60s scoop. Next. The Case of the Burgled Bundle is the third installation of the series and came out in April 2021. In this book, a cultural gathering is disrupted by the theft of the memory bundle. The mystery is very entertaining. Non-Indigenous kids will learn elements of Cree culture and history in a non-didactic way. And it's another great example of a diverse book that doesn't center around trauma, but simply brings representation of Indigenous cultures and people into the mainstream. It highlights art, history, sacred practices, and community connections that exist in Cree culture within a very entertaining narrative. Next. Okay, so that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening in. If you would like to get in touch, you can email me at the email on the screen here. You can also leave your email in the Q&A, and we're going to be sent those notes afterwards. And I really hope that you guys check out our books. Our info is all on Edelweiss if you would like to take a closer look. Yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Yeah, so about us, for those who don't know us, Lorimer has been publishing fiction and nonfiction since 1975. Our children's and teens imprints specifically focus on diverse books for middle grade and young adults. Many of our books are high-low to engage reluctant readers, some in series and some standalone, and we're proud to have many of our own voice authors writing about their experiences firsthand. Next slide, please. So first up, we have 2 series for early readers published by our sister company, Formac. Next slide. The first one we're getting into is the Max and Morgan series. So these series are printed in dyslexia-friendly fonts with fun typography and artwork. The different books in each series deal with different topics that kids will encounter in their everyday lives, and that we're proud that these will resonate with kids who have issues like ADHD or anxiety, who don't usually see characters their own age dealing with the same types of things. Next slide, please. So for our first series here is a dyslexia-friendly series called The Secret Games of Maximus Todd. Max Todd is a young kid with ADHD. The various titles in this series take readers through common scenarios kids will be familiar with, like going to the doctor or playing soccer, where Max needs to overcome his jitters and fidgets to focus on the task at hand. Next slide. So our second dyslexia-friendly series is Be Brave, Morgan. Morgan is a young kid with anxiety. The series presents readers with situations where Morgan has to overcome his fears, like riding new rides at the fall fair or standing up to bullies teasing a classmate. This shows kids that although something may be unknown, they can still be brave enough to face it, just like Morgan. Next slide, please. So this is going to get into books for middle grade. Next books we have are 2 of our middle grade series. So for our illustrated humor series features relatable and lovable characters teaching lessons about life skills, friendship, bullying, self-esteem, and achieving goals. They are in a comic strip style illustration throughout to keep reluctant readers engaged, and they are perfect for bridging the gap between graphic novels and full text novels. Next slide, please. So our illustrated humor also focuses on, so for today's presentation at least, we'd like to call attention to The Fake Chicken Kung Fu Fighting Blues, a book that celebrates Chinese culture. So 12-year-old Anthony is devastated when his family moves from Chinatown to a remote northern local community. There are no other Asian families around, and the move is very hard on it for his grandmother, Popo, who doesn't speak English, and puts a fake chicken over the front door for luck. As Anthony discovers the joys of small town life, his new friends get an introduction to his Chinese culture, and even Popo begins to feel at home. Next slide, please. Yep, so we have our sports series as well. So our sports series are action-driven sports novels that turn reluctant readers into all-star readers. They feature characters with diverse racial backgrounds, physical, mental, and economic backgrounds, playing a wide variety of sports. Next slide. So for the first one here, Last Pick. So Last Pick focuses around Jazz, who had a developmental condition growing up that left her kind of clumsy and had troubles with speech. Now growing up that she's rid of her symptoms, she's ready to play basketball at her Vancouver high school. And the reappearance of an old school bully makes her question herself. With a focus on ability and team loyalty, Last Pick emphasizes teamwork and countering bullying with fairness and forgiveness. Likewise, Stick Pick, the second book here, focuses on Janine, who leads her hockey team to victory at the provincial championships, but on the way home is in a car accident and is left paralyzed from the waist down. Her best friend and teammate Rowena urges her to look into sledge hockey. And this ends up with her, through her experience, speaking up about the rights for the disabled, taking her cause all the way to the professional sports arena. So it is based on real life experience and research. And the story tracks the emotional and physical challenges of first dealing with disability. Next slide, please. So for Called Up, so for this story focuses around David Timko, who's really focused on making his local hockey team. He doesn't unfortunately quite make the cut, and he's forced to play in his house league. His attitude due to that ends up with him getting benched. Likewise, his good friend at school, Omar, doesn't quite understand his problem. Omar, on the other hand, has his own problems that he's dealing with. He's a recent Syrian refugee who's dealing with his anger towards his parents who can't find good jobs in his new country or provide for him the same ways they used to. Likewise, his older brother was left in Syria. As both boys become more and more frustrated with their own problems, their friendships begin to suffer. And it ultimately comes up to a question of whether these two boys can reach a resolution and understanding in their friendship. For Sliding Home, this story focuses on Miguel, who who's from El Salvador and misses his father and currently is living with his mother and sister in the United States. So with his father is still in El Salvador and his father's situation becoming critical, Miguel becomes desperate to bring him home to North America, but he can't really quite afford to even go on his baseball team road trip. So so what ends up happening is they propose a large fundraiser via baseball, and as sort of he grows to come to accept the new realities of being a new immigrant kid, he also learns to trust his neighbors and his new teammates. Next slide, please. Yep. So Lone Runner is set in a diverse neighborhood in Scarborough, Ontario. The book follows Michaela as she goes from a solitary runner to an athlete who contributes to the success of her cross-country team. Discouraged by an incident at her mostly white summer camp, she comes into her own as part of her racially diverse school track team. It's focusing on themes of persistence, friendship, and overcoming rivalries. And the book eliminates traits of connection, empathy, and forgiveness. Next slide, please. So this is our books for young adult. Finally, we have two of our main series for that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so record books help reluctant readers understand social issues like racism and conflict by telling true stories of sports heroes. They are written with a flair that makes them sports icons come alive, and they're also great for ESL and adult readers. Next slide, please. So Jordan Tutu, this follows Jordan Tutu as he became the first Inuk player to play in the NHL. Although hockey is a rough sport to begin with, Jordan is known for having to fight his way through. So this new updated biography explores the struggles and accomplishments of the most recognized role for a young Aboriginal and Inuit people today. So Carey Price. So this book focuses on Carey Price and how he went from flying hundreds of miles across the country so he can play on an organized hockey team to becoming the highest paid goalie in the NHL. So he's the son of the chief of First Nation, and Carey got to start playing, of course, there. He was a natural athlete when he was younger. and then was drafted into the Montreal Canadiens 3 years later. Now, as one of the most recognizable figures in hockey, Carey credits his success to his community in Anaheim Lake, whose hard work and commitment often faced off against the remoteness and cost. So throughout his incredible career, he's taken every opportunity to encourage young people, especially those from who share his Indigenous background, to follow their dreams. Lacrosse Warrior follows Gaylord Palace, who was playing lacrosse by the age of 3. His father was also a famous player who taught Gaylord everything he knew, but his tremendous skill and native ancestry made him a target on and off the lacrosse floor. Gaylord learned that his best revenge was to improve his game. He became a standard for sportsmanship and skill, and a pioneer in promoting equality for Canadian athletes of all ethnic backgrounds. Next slide, please. So we're going to focus on PK Subban. So born in Canada to parents who emigrated from the Caribbean, PK Subban is a remarkable athlete and role model. PK's story has evolved into an incredible family story of 3 generations born in Canada, brothers who, starting with PK, were all drafted into the NHL. Willie O'Ree follows Willie O'Ree as he quietly made NHL history at the Montreal Forum in January 18th, 1958, when he became the first Black player to take to the ice. The color barrier in the NHL broken. It would be 16 years before the next Black player, Mike Marson, was drafted. So this book follows his early life in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and his journey into the NHL. For Jerome Ignanala, he's the face of the Calgary Flames nowadays, but there is much more to his story than just being the first Black captain of an NHL team. He's also known for his social commitment and generosity off the ice. Likewise, he grew up in a single household in St. Albert, Alberta, and following his kind of rise up through the ranks. Next slide, please. So our Real Love series is a collection of YA novels that focus on LGBTQ plus teen relationships. The novels feature diverse teen characters in contemporary settings as they experience love, romance, dating, sex, body image, and more. So these contemporary YA romances are from our own voices authors who write from real world experience. Next slide, please. Yep. So Confessions of a Drag Queen, of a Teenage Drag King. 17-year-old Lauren tries to navigate the tricky waters of teen romance while keeping up their 2 personas, Ren, a drag king, and Laurie, a typical student, and comes to terms with feelings for his love for Clover and their own identity as an LGBT teen. Love in real life. So Alex, a trans Latino teenager, struggles to reconcile his feelings with a real life crush on a boy in his class through becoming to know a boy online, only to find out that the 2 of them were the same person all along. What Makes You Beautiful. So Logan likes boys and trying on girls' clothing, secrets Logan's family doesn't know. After being bullied for being too effeminate and weird, Logan transfers to an art school where he has more inclusion in the community and where everyone seems more comfortable just being themselves. So slowly, Logan starts accepting being a gender other than male and expresses it as Veronica. Next slide, please. Yeah, so Ace of Hearts follows Alvin, who finds it uncomfortable to think and talk about sex, and he knows he isn't ready. The closer Alvin gets to being physical with someone, the more he's uncertain that this is for him, and he begins to wonder if he's asexual. We Three follows Jassy, who makes 2 quick friends at summer camp, Ames and Sydney, and realizes she's got romantic feelings for both of them. It seems like Jassy may have missed her chance at both love and friendship, since Ames and Sid only seem to have eyes for each other, until Ames and Sid tell Jassy that they want to be with her too. So Prom Kings follows a queer prom committee and follows Charlie, who's looking to get close to a cute new guy in school, Andre, and even ask him to be his prom date. So Charlie and his pal Lewis come up with a plan to get Andre's attention. Unfortunately, it turns out that Charlie panics and says that he couldn't possibly be Andre's secret admirer because he's been dating Lewis. So Charlie begins to realize how much fun he's been having with Lewis and thinks that maybe he's been going after the wrong guy. He apologizes to Lewis and asks him to be his prom date. Meanwhile, Andre has decided to accept Charlie's proposal and Charlie is left with 2 prom dates and trying to figure out which guy he'd like to go with. So that's next slide, please. Yep. So that's a pretty good look at what we've got going on for kids titles that reflect today's topics of identity celebrating stories. I also wanted to let you know that Lorimer also provides free teaching guides for many of our series that include group and independent activities, which could be useful for anyone struggling to find free resources and to help support students at home right now. These can be downloaded, just so you know, at lorimer.ca/teachers. And our books are available from all major retailers and your preferred wholesaler, or directly from our distributor Learner at learnerbooks.com. So keep an eye out for us on social media at Lorimer Kids. And if you're interested in any of our adult titles, you can find our tweets and posts as Lorimer Books. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, and a big thank you to all of today's wonderful panelists. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like the ones you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription. Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, launched on September 7th. To see and share the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists and our sponsors, ECW Press, Minerva Rising Press, Annick Press, Second Story Press, and Lorimer Children Teens. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.